BC First Nations chiefs call on federal and Alberta governments to halt West Coast pipeline advancement. This is Environmental Intelligence, Episode 63. The Union of British Columbia Indian Chiefs is pressing Ottawa and Alberta to stop West Coast pipeline work, citing accelerated climate impacts and disasters. A Science Daily report details bacterial conversion of dissolved uranium to a stable form in mine water at 95% removal within 130 days. British Columbia is examining new hydro megadams to address rising electricity demand. Practitioners should examine consultation records and impact assessment files for current major project applications this week. If you only note one thing today for your compliance calendar, review existing West Coast pipeline environmental assessment documentation for adequacy of Indigenous consultation records under the Impact Assessment Act and British Columbia processes. Consultants preparing impact assessment submissions or environmental assessments for linear energy projects in British Columbia face the immediate need to verify complete engagement records with affected nations. The Union of British Columbia Indian Chiefs is calling on Ottawa and Alberta's government to halt efforts to advance the West Coast pipeline. The statement links further oil industry expansion to accelerated climate change and increased disaster frequency. Previous federal and provincial approvals for similar projects have required demonstration of meaningful consultation under the Impact Assessment Act and British Columbia environmental assessment processes. Current project teams must now assess whether additional engagement steps or revised climate risk modeling will be required before advancing permit applications. Next steps include tracking any formal federal or provincial reply to the August 9 letter and updating client risk registers accordingly. British Columbia First Nations leadership is demanding that federal and Alberta officials stop further advancement of the West Coast pipeline. The action directly engages the Federal Impact Assessment Act consultation provisions and British Columbia environmental assessment requirements for major energy projects. No new regulatory text has been issued, but practitioners should verify that current submissions contain complete records of engagement with affected nations. British Columbia is evaluating additional large-scale hydroelectric facilities to satisfy projected electricity growth. Any new projects will trigger British Columbia environmental assessment processes and Federal Impact Assessment Act reviews, where fish habitat or interprovincial effects are involved. Consultants supporting utility clients should prepare for expanded baseline aquatic studies and cumulative effects modeling. Researchers added glycerol to uranium-contaminated mine water and observed approximately 95% removal of dissolved uranium within 130 days through microbial conversion to a rarely observed stable uranium compound. The process offers a potential monitored natural attenuation or in situ bioremediation option for uranium-impacted groundwater at mining sites. Canadian practitioners assessing risk under Canadian Council of Ministers of the Environment, Soil and Groundwater Guidelines or provincial contaminated sites frameworks should evaluate whether site-specific microbial communities support similar uranium immobilization before selecting active treatment technologies. British Columbia's examination of new hydroelectric megaprojects will require updated environmental baseline programs and cumulative effects assessments for aquatic and terrestrial valued components. Firms supporting British Columbia Hydro or independent power producers should anticipate longer field seasons for fish and wildlife surveys and earlier engagement with provincial regulators on assessment scope. Consider a Phase 2 environmental site assessment at a former uranium exploration site that returns dissolved uranium concentrations above the Canadian Council of Ministers of the Environment freshwater guideline in 2 downgradient wells, yet total uranium in soil remains below industrial land use standards. The findings indicate that adding a carbon source such as glycerol can drive microbial reduction and precipitation of uranium into a sparingly soluble phase within roughly 4 months under anaerobic conditions. In practice, this means confirming the presence of metal-reducing bacteria through quantitative polymerase chain reaction or microcosm testing before assuming the process will occur at scale. The experienced practitioner checks redox conditions and competing electron acceptors first. because sulfate or nitrate reduction can outcompete uranium reduction and leave mobile uranium-6 in solution. Field pilots should therefore include both treated and control zones with frequent oxidation reduction potential and uranium speciation sampling, rather than relying solely on total concentrations. The most common mistake is selecting active pump and treat without first testing whether site geochemistry already supports natural immobilization. The fix is to run a short-term microcosm study using site water and native sediment before committing to capital-intensive infrastructure. If you are working on Impact Assessment Act files involving pipeline or energy corridors in British Columbia, review the Union of British Columbia Indian Chiefs August 9 statement for implications on current files. If you are assessing uranium-contaminated sites, evaluate whether they could benefit from glycerol-amended bioremediation testing before finalizing remedial options. If you hold British Columbia hydroelectric or linear infrastructure permits, brief clients on the need for updated consultation records following the latest First Nations correspondence. Monitor federal and Alberta responses to the pipeline halt request for any resulting changes to project timelines or additional study requirements. Track federal and provincial replies to the August 9 British Columbia First Nations pipeline statement for immediate effects on active environmental assessments. Review any new British Columbia hydro project announcements for updates to environmental assessment scoping requirements. Assess laboratory capacity for uranium speciation analyses if moving forward with bioremediation pilots at mining sites. In the next briefing, watch for federal and Alberta responses to the August 9 British Columbia First Nations pipeline statement. That's environmental intelligence for today. If this briefing is useful to your practice, share it with a colleague and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. We'll be back with the next briefing. Have a productive day. And if you'd rather watch than listen, find us on YouTube at NARA Network. Links in the show notes. Quick tip from the network. Try modern investing techniques next. Modern strategies for Canadian and US investors. Every NARA Network show is free at naranetwork.com. And on the website, every episode's visuals live in our free image gallery at naranetwork.com/gallery. Royalty-free under Creative Commons, download with attribution. This episode used AI voice synthesis of my voice. Editorial selection and analysis are my own.